Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 164. I hope you're doing well. How are things growing and changing in nature where you are? Here in Brisbane, the weather's really changing very quickly. It's t-shirt weather already, and there have been some very warm days. For my nature journaling practice, I'm still enjoying focusing on my vegetable garden, and I've had daily discoveries that make me gasp in amazement about what's happening. The most exciting one has been that I'm growing corn in my veggie patch for the first time. The variety I'm growing at the moment is called Glass Gem, and it's a variety where each of the corn kernels has gorgeous purple and silver colours. They're amazing. Anyway, my corn is growing flowers now, a long spike at the top of the plant. And now the little cobs are developing as well, and I've never seen this process in action, but the silks of the corn are protruding out, and then when I tapped the flowers at the top, a big cloud of pollen wafted out. It was amazing to see. It's another one of those lovely garden first for me moments, and it made me very happy to see it. And then the extra special part about this is I get to put it down in my garden journal and learn about exactly what's going on and cement this knowledge through the process of drawing and writing about it. It's definitely making me a better gardener and a more engaged gardener. I've had phases of gardening before in the past where I'll get really into it and have a burst of a couple of months or a season of being really committed, and then life becomes busy and other things take over. But I've been letting the motivation from the flourishing garden feed my journaling practice, and then the garden journal feed my motivation to keep planting and creating beauty in the garden. It's a winning sort of feedback loop, and I'm really excited about it. Before we jump into today's prompt episode, I want to welcome the new patron who started supporting the show this week. Hello, your support means so much and helps me make this podcast project sustainable in the long term. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to all the Patreon supporters who've been with me for a while, or even some who have been supporting from the beginning. You're seen and appreciated. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to tell you a story as an introduction to this week's prompt. Actually, I'm going to tell you two stories. The first is that I was looking back over my perpetual journal, which I mentioned last time is very sparse, and I've not been able to commit to that form of journaling very well for whatever reason. But one of the entries that's in there had a picture of a callistemon that I planted, and on it was a strange looking insect larvae, and at the time, I remember not knowing what it was. It looked like a caterpillar, but not quite. I didn't have any kind of box to categorize it in, so I wrote caterpillar in my journal entry, but I kind of knew that that wasn't right. Then, just recently, I came across a whole army of larvae on the same callistemon plant, and they were all lined up and literally stripping the leaf and leaving this living leaf skeleton. It was so weird and so cool, and I looked it up and I found out that this is callistemon sawfly larvae, and they work together to strip plants in this way. Then a bit later I realized that this was the same larvae that I saw before and categorized in my perpetual journal as a caterpillar, but that's not what it is, and so I had my question answered, even though it was a couple of years later, and I did this by looking back at my old journals. In my workshops, I always talk about using questions in our journals and how it doesn't matter if you know the answer right away, that questioning itself helps you connect with your subject, and that in writing it down, your question is put out there into the world, and the answer might come in the future, and it might be sooner or it might be in 2 years down the line. So this is something I say in my workshops, but I think this is the first time I've actually experienced that happening, where a question is answered, something that I wrote down or questioned in my nature journal a long time ago, then was answered because of knowledge that I'd gained in the interim. So that was an exciting thing that came as a result of looking back at my old journals. The second story is also about looking back at old journal entries. Recently, I went to one of the environment centres here in Brisbane, the Boondall Wetlands Environment Centre, where I had some of my journals and nature art displayed in a community art space, and it had been there for a few months and it was time to take it down so the next artist could put up their display. And it was so nice to be reunited with my journals and to open the pages and to go over old journal entries. And it got me thinking about this week's prompt. So I propose for this week's prompt that we revisit our old journals. Look back on the pages you created and the things that you experienced in nature in the past. There are lots of lovely reasons to revisit our journal entries. When we put down our nature experiences, it's like we take a whole body snapshot of the experience, what we were seeing and hearing and smelling and experiencing with all of our senses. So when we look back on the pages, we get to experience the whole thing with intense clarity and re-experience that time in nature, again, in full colour detail. Another reason to revisit our old pages is to get reminded of methods or motifs that we had been using that we might have forgotten about and would like to use again. When I look back on my old journal pages, I often find journaling techniques that I used, and then I'm reminded to use them again in future pages, like getting a little bit of inspiration from your previous self. And like I experienced when I looked back on my perpetual journal and answered my own question from before about the sawfly larvae, you can find that your nature experiences since your old entries have given you knowledge that you didn't previously have. And you can have a deeper understanding now, and you might experience this too, that you can answer your old questions. Another reason to look back on your journals is that you can see how far you've come. You might notice that your art skills have developed over time and your methods for documenting what you notice have developed or changed. It can be a really interesting experience to see that development of yourself over time. These are just some of the reasons to look back on old journal entries and see what they can teach you. I'd love to hear about your experiences when you look back on old journals. What do you see? How have you grown and developed as a journaler and as an artist? What would you like to take from your old work and bring into your current journals, and what will you leave behind? You can leave a comment below this episode on the Journaling with Nature website. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.